Hello CS211ers. This will be a brief introduction to how to get Project 5 up and going. It's a little bit different in nature than previous projects that we've done, so a bit of a tutorial is probably in order to get you guys oriented. On the screen before you, you'll see DrJava up and running, and over on the right here is part of the project directory. We'll deal in this video with just the first part, which is the testing problem, where you have 13 different implementations, some of which are buggy, and one of which is correct. No telling at this point what's up, but getting this into a state where you start running tests out of Project 5 tests.java to test whether implementations are buggy or not is a little bit of a pain. So you'll take some steps here to make that a little bit easier. So the first thing to get going is to grab that Project 5 tests.java that's been provided and pull that up in DrJava. This should compile out of the bat in that it has correct code. The only trouble is that we'll be using packages this time around, and that each of these implementation folders over here, imp1, imp2, contains within it a package directory, and within it then is the binary class files for the pair and test me classes that you're supposed to be writing tests for. So unfortunately, out of the box then, if you press compile in DrJava, you'll get some errors down here. And if I make this big enough for you to actually see, you'll see that it says something about I don't know where the mode package exists. That's something that we can remedy so that you can actually work in DrJava with very little trouble. It just means adjusting the class path that DrJava uses to search for classes. That's done by let's see, you'll probably want to pick one of the implementations. So I'll pick imp1 just as a start off, and grab from up here in my little window thing what the exact path is. I'm pressing Control-C to copy that. And then over in DrJava under Preferences, there's a spot to add extra places to look for classes. And this will be necessary because we're compiling, in this case, against a binary class file. I'll just pop this window open and paste in the path that I had. Press Select, and you'll see then here listed an extra spot for Java will look as it tries to compile stuff. I'll punch OK, and at this point, I should now be able to compile tests and potentially start running them. So running at this point is somewhat useless, and okay, I forget, when you're testing you should press the test button, not the run button. And you'll see the example test that's provided that does almost nothing except demonstrate those assertions, isn't particularly useful. So you'll maybe in Mac need to find a different way to find this path, but other than that, the process of setting the class path in Java is in DrJava is generally similar. You can always drop down to the command line. For instance, over here, I've set myself up in the same directory, and if you need to do that quickly, I have presently copied the path. You do a CD, and then I'll paste my path in here. I don't want to go down into the imp1 directory, so I'll back up one and have a look in here. There are my implementation directories and so forth. You can Java C, and in this case you'll need to include the current directory where the Project 5 test class is at, the JUnit file, because that has all those assertions in it, and then one of the implementation folders, for instance, imp1. In this case, I'll try and compile Project 5 tests.java. That should pop out okay. And then in addition to that, pull this command line up, just do a little bit of editing. I can run those tests as well in the command line. Now the nice part about the command line here is I can dodge over here and change from imp1 to imp2. Now I'll be running my tests against the second implementation instead, and the third implementation, and so forth. In a couple minutes, we'll get to how to automate that process a little bit so that you don't have to constantly type in imp1, imp2, imp3, and so forth. But for the moment, let's just examine quickly how you go about writing tests on this project. So for that, you'll need to make edits within the DrJava or editor of choice down here in this section in which you actually write tests to deal with the test me and pair classes. There's a brief demonstration of that in the project spec, but probably more pertinent is over here. There's documentation linked off of the project spec under Java Docs which list both the two classes you're supposed to be testing, along with the methods that they provide and their intent in terms of what they're supposed to accomplish. So clicking on these guys gives you a little bit more information, including some implementation notes about which functions rely upon which other functions. That will be important as you try to sort out, in some cases, what the exact problems are with each implementation and speculate about that. Isolating it to a single function or a single set of functions will be what gets you full credit in describing what's there. So let's pause for a second and step out of this test me business and instead examine the pair class, which is a relatively simple pair, perhaps a little bit different than some of the pairs that you guys saw in class, in that this takes two different types and can have, for instance, a string and an integer or a float and a file, but it's more or less something that keeps track of a first and a second element. Down here are some of the functions that each class provides, and note also that there are some static functions which may be useful. To demonstrate this, let's just take the constructor, which is here, takes a first and a second element, and write a simple test to make sure that get first and get second work out right. So back over in DrJava, I'm going to make a copy of this at test business to begin with because I'm lazy. But I'll need to rename it to maybe pair constructor. Can spell constructor 1. Okay, and I'll give myself a pair. Dealing with the generics here, I'll have to pick two concrete types. I'll pick integer and string, for instance. Call this a P. I'll make a new one. It's a pair of integer and string again, and this will be 1 and high. So after making that, if all is functioning, no exceptions thrown, I'll want to evaluate whether or not that get first and get second elements return the proper stuff. So for that, I can do something like integer expect first, maybe. Equals, I'll ask for it to get first, and then put in an assertion that these two things are equal. Expect, let's see, 1 and expect first. So that's a good enough way to start out. Punch in compile, and you'll notice an error here in that Java is unable to determine which version of assert equals to call. The 1 here is ambiguous, as we have both the baby primitive ints or the capital integer ints. What's popped out of expect first, or the get first here, is a capital integer int. So I'll just give the compiler a little bit of a hint here to say, actually, what I mean is the capital integer version of 1. I'll insert some stuff to upcast that. We should be able to compile now and test, and you'll see here my pair constructor 1 so far is completing successfully. I probably also want to do something for the second, and I'll make that a little bit briefer, in that I know that what I expect to come out of here is high, and I can p.get second to come up there. So both these assertions have to pass in order for the test to be considered passing. Punch test this time, probably ask me if I want to save, and I'll say yes, and so far we're in the green. So this is not a particularly useful test, since if the pair screwed up get first and get second, it might not work out so well for anything else that relies upon pair. But hey, who knows what could potentially be going wrong with that pair class. Now the final bit of this is you're responsible for running this file against 13 other files, or sorry, 13 implementations. And again, the tedium involved with taking this command line after compiling and punching in fors. Ooh, actually I get a failure at this point, so there's a hint to some of you guys about perhaps the pair constructor is actually not functioning in some of these implementations. But at any rate, seeing that I'd want to type in a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, should immediately scream, oh man, I need a loop for something like this. The thing is, we need a loop not in Java land, but in Windows command shell land in this case, or potentially if you're running a Mac in Unix land for this. So we'll take a brief foray into shell scripts. I'll admit up front that I am not a Windows shell command guy. I'm a more Unix command guy. But I've done you guys the solid of looking up how exactly you could write a little bash script or a shell script to do this in Windows. I'm not going to provide the file, but you're free to pause the video and punch it in. Over here, I've made myself a little testall.bat. BAT is short for batch. Most of the Windows scripting stuff are referred to as batch scripts. So I'll pop this thing open and examine some esoteric syntax for for loops in Windows bash or Windows command shell line. The for should be somewhat obvious, and do is like, okay, here's what I'm doing multiple times. The screwy stuff in here, \L has something to do with a counting loop in Windows command line. The %x sets up a parameter that's going to start at 1, increment by 1 each time, and go up to 13. I have a little message here that will print to the screen so that I know which implementation I'm testing at each point. And then here's the command I actually want run repeatedly. Notice the %x here is going to be substituted subsequently for 1 on the first iteration, 2 in the second iteration, and so forth. So you'll probably want to punch this in, save it in a .bat or a .cmd file. And what that will enable you to do is, if I buzz over here to command line, look, here's my testall.bat. If I just type testall.bat, that command will get run as if I typed it into the command line. And you see lots of things whizzing by here. In particular, you see testing 12, and then the unit test run, testing 13, and then the unit test being run. So this is more or less saving me the trouble of by hand going through all of that stuff. And you notice if I scroll way back up here, one of these guys, number 4, seems to have bummed out on the pair constructor. This is quite a bit of output to process in the command shell. You feel free to sort of script back, but if you want a more stable way of viewing that, then you can pipe output into another file by using this little redirect here. And that works on Unix as well. It will take anything this would have printed to the screen and put it in a file. We'll call mine results.txt. You'll notice nothing's getting printed right now because all of that output is getting shuffled into results.txt, which you can view in whatever text editor you want. I've got DrJava opened, so I'll just have a look here at results.txt, and you see all of the stuff that's sort of up there, including passes and failures and so forth. So that should give you enough to go on if you're a Windows user to get up and running on this front. For you Mac users out there, if you want to set up some sort of a script in order to run against this rather than the testall.bat, I'm going to jump over quickly to a Unixy environment, and you'll probably be running from your terminal bash. So let me just jump over into this thing. Over here on the right now, we'll do a little ls, you'll see in the same general setup, but what I need is a slightly different syntax for each of the implementations to do that loop. So general syntax for this will be something like for f in imp star. So this goes through and will match each of these implementations. There's a do, and then I'll say echo testing f, and then let me make this a little bit bigger so that you guys can see. I want my Java CP here, colon for separators. I want that junit.cs211.jar, and then also the %f, the $f. This is the f is set up as a variable and will be substituted then for either imp1 or imp2 or imp3 in there. And then I want to run the project 5 tests. Now if I actually got this one right on the first try, I'll be surprised. But yeah, looks like it's doing just fine. Same thing here in that you're seeing on the output testing various things, not quite in order this time due to the numbering. You can talk to me if you want to fix that up a little bit. But I can also pipe this into a results.txt, which will take a few seconds, but then I can look at those results as a text file in DrJava. So hopefully that gives you guys a good way to get started on the testing facet of this. You'll want to include tests for the various functionalities in pair and also for the various functions that exist within the test.me file. Good luck, and I'll look for a separate video that discusses setting up the debugger to work on the second part, the debugging problem in this project. Cheers!